Listen close, it's the occult folks. It's the occult folks. It's the occult folks.
All right, well, welcome to the show. Today we have Robert Frederick from The Hidden Life is the Best. And thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate you.
Nice to meet you, Alex. Good to be here.
Yes, sir. So, do you want to start off by telling everybody where to find you, if you got a Patreon or anything like that?
So yeah, I have a podcast called The Hidden Life is Best, Francis Bacon and the Gnostic English Empire. You could find it typing any of those in. I think The Hidden Life is Best works. And I'm on Patreon at the same Patreon, The Hidden Life is Best. And for $5 a month, you get all my deep dives into Shakespeare plays. But the first three podcasts are totally free. And that's the best place to find them. I also have a Substack, The Hidden Life is Best, but I haven't gotten all the podcasts over there yet. I've done 18 episodes. They take me weeks to do. They're all written out. I do a lot of research. The first three or four came easy because I had been doing this for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I did the podcast is because I was just finding so much information. And the goal is to write a book about everything.
Oh, wow.
And it's about Shakespeare. So then I would do a Shakespeare play and I would just find like crazy stuff in there. So The Hidden Life is Best at Substack or Patreon.
Very cool. Yeah,
Oh,
so
oh,
definitely.
excuse me. And
Mhm.
excuse me, sorry. All the podcast apps, The Hidden Life is Best. And all the podcasts have like at least intros or long intros or the full episode. So I recommend if you like what you hear, just start with episode one any of the podcast apps. So
Mm-hmm.
there we go.
Yeah, and definitely recommend checking out the Patreon. The amount of work that you put into it's definitely worth it. So, yeah, so with that, kind of what was like your tip off to like the whole Shakespeare Bacon controversy?
Well, it came out of a desire to know why the world was so messed up, despite myself semi well educated, semi well traveled, various occupations, meeting a lot of people, taking an interest in people, and generally everyone I meet or get to know was reasonably intelligent and fair-minded, and I just couldn't understand why was the world still messed up. And I realized that the people in control didn't really want solutions. They kind of generated conflict. And in the modern era, they want patents. They don't really want a cheap solution. They want a genetically modified product or a medicine that's patentable and to make profit on the supposed solution. And somehow I came around to the idea that it was the British Empire. Look, wherever there was conflict in the world, I saw that the British had been there. And
Mm-hmm.
I tried to read up on history and being mostly self-educated. I have a degree, but it's in art. I never studied literature, though I was always a big reader. And I just started honing in on the British Empire. And the funny thing was I had never read any Shakespeare. In the 80s, Mel Gibson, some of you young cats might know that name. He's an old
Yeah.
timer by now, but he was the big star of the day in the 80s, and he made Hamlet,
Mm-hmm.
the most famous Shakespeare play. And everybody seems to have to do an homage to Shakespeare if they want to get big in the business. They either got to make a movie or be in a play or something like that. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
mean, that was about it, but I always wanted to know like more about Shakespeare too. Like I didn't know what people meant when they said Lady Macbeth or Iago or Othello and what none of that meant. So I always wanted to know that too. And I was on to the British Empire, and I think I had heard that Francis Bacon was considered to be a secret Shakespeare. And then one day I'm listening to a video and, just kind of hungry for more information. And the video was about the founding of Jamestown, which is the first English colony ever in America, the first successful one. There was an unsuccessful one about 20 years earlier at Roanoke,
Mm-hmm.
headed up by Sir Walter Raleigh. That failed. That's one of the great mysteries of American history because everybody disappeared without a trace.
Mm-hmm.
20 years later, they settled Jamestown. Jamestown is on the Chesapeake Bay. It's just down the road from Washington, D.C. And 20 years after that, the Pilgrims came to the Boston area, Cape Cod and Plymouth and all that. And they get more attention as the Pilgrims come to America. But it was really Jamestown that were there 20 years before. They were not religious rebels. They were insiders. They were backed by a corporation. And it so happened that Chesapeake Bay is on the Susquehanna River, and the Susquehanna River winds its way all the way up north. And I believe it starts in Cooperstown, New York, where the Baseball Hall of Fame is. But I'm from New York, and I went to school on the Susquehanna River. So I took an extra
Oh, cool.
interest in this. What? The Susquehanna goes down to the Chesapeake, and it's Jamestown. And this guy doing the video says, and Francis Bacon was on the corporate board that settled Jamestown. I was like, what? Francis Bacon was part of the colonization scheme too? And it really pricked my ears up. And I had thrown a book on my bed just before, and this whole thing randomly, I pulled it off my shelf, like, man, I never looked at that book. I bought it on the street. There used to be booksellers covering the streets of the East Village here in New York. You could buy
Mm-hmm.
great books for 50 cents. So this is one of those books. And I had never looked at it. I'm walking up, to finish this video, threw it on the bed, and then I finished the video and I shot an email to a friend saying, man, because this friend of mine had gone to school with me on the Susquehanna, and he's a
Mm-hmm.
history buff. And I was like, the Susquehanna River, Chesapeake Bay, Jamestown, Francis Bacon, a few other things. I go, Francis Bacon, blah, blah, blah. Shakespeare, maybe. He wasn't a real conspiracy guy, but he was a history guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I closed the computer and I grabbed the book. All right, let me see, what's this book? And I opened the book totally randomly in a weird way. I didn't look at the cover, I didn't look at the back. I didn't do that. I just opened it up randomly about 30 pages from the back, and I looked randomly at the right page about three-quarters of the way down, and I just started reading, and the first two words I saw were Francis Bacon. It was really, really weird. And I closed the book. I didn't even know what the name of the book was. I'd forgotten. And the name of the book was The Roots of Coincidence. And it
Whoa.
was a book about trying to understand psychic phenomena from a scientific point of view. Like, can we nail down what psychic phenomena is, like J.B. Rhine did at Duke? And I was like, what just happened? It's not a book about Francis Bacon. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
book about England. It's not even a book about history. They just grabbed this Francis Bacon quote to sort of sum up the book. And I was like, all right, message received. I got to check into Francis Bacon. And I started checking it to Bacon. I'm like, what? So he's Shakespeare? So he invented modern science, which was my thing. Like I saw that they had turned science into religion. I always liked science. I was good at math and I like science, but I could see that like science ultimately doesn't really know that much. As amazing as it is, we're
Yeah.
talking over this incredible invention. I love science, but let's face it, science doesn't know where a thought comes from. Science doesn't know how memory works. Science doesn't know what love is or
Yeah.
make a painting, but it was like science. Science is man's best invention ever. I could just see that they were using science to manipulate us and control us. So I was onto that. So I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
invented science. He's secret William Shakespeare. He was the greatest lawyer. He was into the colonization scheme. And then here's where it got really weird is that it seemed like he was involved with Freemasonry and starting Freemasonry and the Rosicrucian hoax. And then he
Oh.
was part of British intelligence. So it's espionage, the precursor to MI5, MI6, and the CIA. So it was just like, what? Francis Bacon? And then you start, poking around, and there's three big areas on the internet, three big giant websites that know a lot about Francis Bacon because he's a major figure in the history of philosophy because he got modern science going. Like before Francis
Hmm.
Bacon, people did science on their own as alchemy, trying to make gold, whatever. Or people were inventing things. They had ships, and I mean, we've always had science.
Hmm.
And since then, I've realized that what Bacon happened to do is he saw all these advances being made in London. Something about London, man. It's like the English are really smart, and they're so smart they don't let you know they're smart. You think about
Yeah.
who are the smartest people in the world? And you might say, the Japanese are so smart. The French are so intellectual. Or the Jews, they think they're smart. Maybe they're the smartest, but no, it's the Brits, it's the English. They're like crazy smart. And that's where science really took off. It was already taken off. And Bacon, what I've learned is that he wanted to control it. He wanted to bring it under the control of the aristocracy. And that's pretty much what he managed to do. And he was this incredibly brilliant guy who not only was Shakespeare, which is pretty mind-blowing, and I've really dug into the plays. Now I know a lot about Shakespeare. I probably know a lot about like 9 or 10 plays. I really need to write all the plays that I've dug deep into. But he saw the future, which was science. This is a time when nobody was doing science. And he actually predicted technocracy, which is the rule by science, rule by scientists. And
Interesting.
that's really what we seem to be heading toward, and everybody's afraid of now, and rightly
Yeah.
so, that they can survey us and surveillance and judge us and make money digital and the technocracy would be ruled by scientists. And he wrote a book called New Atlantis that predicted that it's a fable of a land discovered by sailors that's run by scientists. And that's a whole giant rabbit hole there. And all these areas are just huge topics. Shakespeare's a huge topic. Every single Shakespeare play is a huge topic.
Yeah.
The nature of Shakespeare and how revered he is in the history of literature, the history of theater, intellectual history is like crazy. I had no idea, but he's like a god. And that's literally what they did. My last article uh, on Substack is about how they made a religion out of Shakespeare. And I'll just say one more thing.
Hmm.
I really believe that Bacon created three religions. That what he really knew was psychology. He really knew what makes us tick. And he was able to create three religions. And one of them being Freemasonry, which is a religion, one of them being Shakespeare, which is kind of tongue in cheek, I say as a religion, but as I dug further in, they literally did make it a religion. They thought of Shakespeare as a god or a demigod. He's still like that in academia. Like if
Hmm.
Shakespeare did it, it's good, it's correct. It's like
Yeah.
you kind of can't criticize Shakespeare, or it means you're nuts or something's wrong with you.
Hmm.
It's like saying you don't like babies or
Exactly.
sunshine or
Yeah.
something. And the third one, so I said Freemasonry, Shakespeare, science.
Hmm.
Science is another religion. And here's where it gets crazy. A secret sauce is that he was secretly a Gnostic, and
Mm.
Gnosticism is a religion that attempts to embody all the other religions so they can do magic because they're really into magic, and they think that the world is evil and that the world was made by a demiurge, which means craftsman in ancient Greek, and it was like a new thought around the time of Christ, birth of Jesus, that something snapped and people began to see the world not as an illusion or a dream, like maybe the Hindus say the world is illusion, or the Buddhists say illusion, or the Christians say be not of this world. But they all might have said that and felt it, but they thought the world was good. The Gnostics think that the world is evil to trap our souls here, and that only a few of us can escape that, and they do it by gathering light, and they think they can escape being reincarnated. So Gnostics believe in reincarnation, and they want to escape prison planet by gathering sparks of light, by doing magic. That's the short version of it. So
Hmm.
then I discovered this whole Gnostic thing, and I'm finding Gnosticism in the plays and in Bacon's writing, and he kept it all hidden. But I do think that the aristocracy and the elite of England are secretly Gnostic, and that's why they built the empire, the British Empire, so they could just take over the planet. And we keep talking about globalization. Well, that started with Freemasonry. That was he thought that all out.
Hmm.
And he created this secret society called Freemasonry that was designed in a very interesting way based on earlier secret societies. I now have learned that. I've just learned all this stuff. But a, a book came out recently, a very scholarly book that said the Freemasons really are the origin of globalization because wherever the British Empire went, they plopped down a Freemasonic lodge, and the whole way Freemasonry is organized encouraged and made globalization easier, especially 300 or 400 years ago, before the internet, phone calls, it was hard to even send a letter.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Man, I mean, yeah,
Crazy.
you see Freemason lodges pop up within a couple years of the founding of pretty much any city that you want to name.
100%.
Rampant. Like
Especially
it's
here in New York on the East Coast.
really,
There's like
yeah.
hundreds of towns, like tiny towns. They all have Masonic lodges. They're also out of business. Masonry's shrinking for the first time ever for like 30 or 40 years now. It seems to be
Really.
in trouble, yeah. Like kids just don't want to join it. The advantages it used to give you are not so much anymore because of the internet. Like it used to be if you traveled somewhere as a Freemason, you could instantly find a lodge, make 20 friends, I have a place to stay probably. It would just set you up.
Yeah.
You kind of don't need that anymore. And as far as business contacts, there's still reasons to join, but I don't think they're as compelling
Do you
as they
think
used
there's
to be.
do you think there's like some kind of like stigma now because of the internet and some of these things coming to light or
That could be true. It's also kind of goofy.
yeah.
I mean, you got to wear certain clothes. You have to memorize all this mumbo jumbo, all
Sometimes you got
this.
to go in a damp cave,
Well, if
depending on how
that's
high up
the
you are.
next level,
Yeah.
there's the level that Bacon put together that's actually kind of free of that kind of really weird stuff, except there's the third degree where they pretend to kill you and you pretend to die and you get reborn. There's this whole complicated death and rebirth thing. That's theatrical and
Yeah.
apparently is very moving. And Freemasons talk about being raised, and it's very similar to being born again. He piggybacked onto Christianity in a lot of ways with Shakespeare, Freemasonry, and science, but it's not Christian at all. But that gets, and what you find out when you get into Gnosticism is you get into comparative religion and comparing different religions. But yeah, Freemasonry is a whole giant topic that part of his brilliance, I really think it was more brilliant than the Shakespeare plays because you can kind of imagine writing a play, but it's kind of hard to imagine starting a secret society that pushes the button so perfectly that it becomes hugely successful and stays secret at the same time because it was formed around his lifetime, which was 1600, and the world didn't know about it till like 1717 when it announced itself in London.
Interesting.
And in the next 100, 200 years, let's say just jump ahead to 2017,
Hmm.
almost every successful man or a huge percentage of successful men became Freemasons, and a huge percentage of the elite of England became Freemasons. Lots
Hmm.
of kings were Freemasons. Lots of prime ministers were Freemasons. And
Our founding fathers, like
yeah,
all of them.
what is it? 15? No, not all of them, but like
Yeah. Wait.
15 of the people that signed the Constitution were Freemasons. George Washington was a Freemason. Some were against it though, like John Adams, the second president. Or
Yeah.
John Quincy Adams, his son, was very much against
Yeah.
Freemasonry.
One thing I saw recently, or came across recently in the early 1800s in America was the anti-Masonic party, like
Yeah.
the political party, which
Yep.
I'd never heard of, and my mind was blown.
Yeah. There's a
Um,
huge anti-Freemasonry movement in early 1800s because of something that happened up here in New York. But yeah, go ahead.
yeah. And yeah, I was gonna ask. So I don't know if this is complete BS or not, but I've heard, you kind of hear mentioned like Shakespeare, yeah, Francis Bacon, had something to do with writing the Bible or possibly?
Yes.
Okay.
So there was terrible religious strife, competition between Catholics and the Protestants, and then the Protestants started bickering with each other. At some point, it was decided they needed a new translation of the Bible. So this was after Queen Elizabeth I died. And around 1610, this is right during new Shakespeare plays are coming out. Bacon was just hitting his stride in government. And they decided to make a new translation of the Bible, which is the famous King James Bible. And it can't be proven that Francis Bacon worked on it, but he was the genius of the day. He was the language guy, even without Shakespeare, especially in London and even in France, where he had lived when he was a kid. It was just known that he was a genius. But they kept it on the down low to some extent. And what they did is they got, I think, 8 groups of 6 men, 6 scholars to do a chunk of the Bible and translate it. It had already been
Mhm.
translated, and they had different methods and translations to go on. And this pile of translations came to King James, and he kept it for a year. Now, all the notes, except for the men that worked on it, have been destroyed. All the like details of where their sources were are gone, and what happened to it that year is not known. But the rumor is very strong that Francis Bacon did the final touches on the Bible, obviously with a team of people.
Hmm.
And there are clues to that because, as was in that original video that got me into this, um, Michael Wan is the guy's name. He was talking about how Francis Bacon was heavily involved in cryptography and steganography, which is cryptography is hiding things in writing.
Hmm.
You have to decipher it. It's also
Yeah.
called a cipher that you decipher. And he was a master at that. And it was a big thing back then. And
Wow.
also steganography, which is hiding things in drawings, which when you get into this, you always see little things. They're hiding in drawings. When I was a kid, they had this magazine, Highlights, that you would find things hidden in the drawing. So it's kind of like that. So he
Yeah.
hid things in especially the drawings of the Bible
I.
on the original King James Bible. There's this elaborate introduction,
Mhm.
especially to King James. And I'll I'll give you my email later. People can I haven't put this up on the internet. I need to do this about the Bible and just kind of answer this whole question. It's another area I want to look at because, for instance, in England, they call the elite Lord, like Lord Bacon, Lord Burleigh. Yes, my Lord. No, my Lord. Well,
Mhm.
Lord means God in the Bible. So it's like they want to be called God, which is the whole thing about the deep occult and Gnosticism in particular, is they want to elevate man over God. So they even like get the commoners to call them God, which is Lord. And I think that shows up in the Bible
Mhm.
because in the King James Bible, they'll use the word Lord. And my Lord ordered me to get 10 bushels of wheat or whatever. And in the other translations, it will use the word master. So I think he did mess around with some of the words, and I think he messed around with Genesis where um, where God kicks Adam and Eve out from the Garden of Eden and put two flaming cherubim to guard the tree of life, because now Adam and Eve knew good and evil. But if they ate from the tree of life, they would never die and become as gods. And so God put flaming cherubim to guard that tree of life. And I think, and I haven't had time to do this, but I'll do it soon. I think Bacon subtly played with the words to make it seem like he could get to the tree of life, which is his goal. Like he doesn't want to die. Like Gnostics hate the world, but they don't ever want to die. And that's really what science is about, the dark science, or what I call scientism, where science is a religious belief. They're desperate to never die. They want to prolong life, or this singularity where they want to download their consciousness into machines. They hate the idea that they're dying, and I get it. It's that's
Yeah.
it's rough, but that's what makes life worth living is that you're going to die, so you have to seize the day. If you never die, if you weren't going to die, there'd be no, it kind of gives life meaning. And a poet said, "Death is the mother of beauty." So there's this huge contradiction in Gnosticism where they hate the world and think it's evil, but they want to own the world and never die at the same time. And that's what dark science is really about. And they're making artificial wombs and they're trying to do AI, trying to make a computer that's smarter than humans, make organs, lab-grown organs. So they can just replace organs when they wear out. And part of science is like they don't understand even why we age. They don't understand that. Like we should
Mhm.
all be living to at least 200, blah, 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 blah. So they're desperate to extend life. And this all comes from Bacon. Bacon was really very interested in life extension. He was really into medicines. And I firmly believe that he was the Rosicrucian movement. And I'm not alone in any of this, by the way.
Mhm.
I'm not making any of this up. I'm original in that I tie in the espionage and I'm pretty original in some of my Shakespeare stuff.
Yeah, I've heard. I mean, I've heard you mention quite a few things that I haven't heard anybody mention.
But
Also,
as far as like Bacon wanting to be say Bacon as a Rosicrucian, like that's pretty common. Like this stuff doesn't come out of the blue. People have suspected Bacon of being Shakespeare literally for 400 years.
hmm
I put it together because I have that conspiracy mindset because of JFK and all the other stuff. You just know that there's something. going on behind the scenes.
Oh yeah,
It's,
one
it's not in the
100%.
newspapers.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just kind of paying like some kind of attention to any of this going on around you, I mean, you kind of at some point you kind of get tipped off to something. It's like, hey, something's going on right now that's, obviously not being told or not
Yeah.
being shown. So one thing I've heard, again, this might be speculation, but when they were translating the Bible to English, that had a huge part in shaping and forming the English language. And if that's true, and if Bacon was a part of that, you kind of see in the English language, like all together, all these words tying together, or they mean different things. Even like Freemasonry,
Yeah.
that name, like Freemasonry or whatever, kind
Yeah.
of like claiming stuff that's not yours, is like an example. I mean, there's a ton of them, but do you think that's a possibility?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Words have the greatest power in life. The pen is mightier than the sword. And in the beginning was the word. And
Oh yeah.
words create pictures in our minds. And hypnosis begins with language. Like to to control someone else's thinking really begins with words and stories, which is not a bad thing. It's like we influence each other with language, and it's just extraordinarily powerful. And Bacon really cracked the code on how to influence other people with language, primarily by manipulating the emotions, but also painting pictures in people's minds and pulling them in, getting them to listen. It's really incredible. So yes, in the Bible, which I think I really haven't had time to delve into this aspect of it, but it's
Hmm.
definitely huge. On the other hand, he couldn't change too much because there's the Hebrew Bible, there's the Greek,
Hmm.
there's the already translated English Bibles, there's the Tyndale Bible and the Geneva Bible that already were in English. So he didn't have free reign
Hmm.
to change things around.
Gotcha.
But there are little things like I'm saying, like the
Hmm.
cherubim and this lords using Lord instead of master. I think was to make that comfortable for the English, which seems kind of crazy to us as Americans to call somebody Lord,
Yeah.
unless it's a joke, but it's really serious over there. And a few other little things like that. Um, he definitely was involved in. And there's a very funny one. Everyone should look it up. It's called Psalm 46, the Shakespeare Psalm 46,
Hmm.
where if you count 46 words from the first word of the psalm, you come to the word shake. And in Psalm 46, if you count 46 words from the last word of the psalm, except for the word Salah, which ends every psalm, don't count that. 46 words from the back, you get spear. So you
Wow.
get shake, spear in Psalm 46, counting 46. And that's a clue. I don't know who discovered that, but that's in the King James, only in the King James Bible. And, the Baconians, as we call ourselves, we all think that Bacon put that in there, which is something you can do. You can move the words around
Hmm.
and pull off little things like that. And also the introduction is completely original. There's stuff hidden in there for sure, because Bacon definitely used codes and hid things in his writing, and especially the arrangement of the pages. The best documentary on this is called Seven Steps to Mercy on YouTube. It's free. It's fantastic. It's not
Interesting.
your typical documentary. It tells a story.
Hmm.
Seven Steps to Mercy about Peter Amundsen from Norway, who believes Bacon was Shakespeare. That's kind of like a no-brainer at this point. There's just so much evidence. But he is this brilliant Freemason code breaker. who goes into the first folio. So the first folio is where all the Shakespeare plays were put together in one book. It's considered the most influential book ever written in English. Each one cost 10 million. They only printed 500 of them. But Bacon had total control of that with his buddy Ben Jonson, another famous playwright. And this Peter Amundsen from Norway code breaks. He's a puzzle solver. Brilliant guy, great guy. And he finds all these hidden codes in there that are Rosicrucian and based on numbers that are very, very credible. And it's a great movie, Seven Steps to Mercy, free on YouTube. It kind of tells the whole story, the history of the Shakespeare authorship controversy. And Petter's no longer a Freemason. He left. But if you've heard about the Oak Island mystery, he ties in with that too, where they thought that maybe the Shakespeare manuscripts were hidden on Oak Island. But
Oh,
yeah, there's codes in there. But Baconians went really nuts around 1900. They were convinced they were reading things in the plays that probably were stretching the truth a bit. And then that's a whole nother big area is what are the codes in the plays? And how
hmm
would you know that you actually cracked the code? So that's a whole thing. But
yeah.
Bacon, at the age of 15, while he was in Paris working as a spy, created this incredible code system that they think they based computer codes on because instead of using ones and zeros like computer codes, it uses two different fonts, like an A and an A prime font. And you can write a letter, it looks totally like any other letter. But if you know to look for the slight changes in fonts, you can you can hide a message in the letter. And Bacon invented that when he was 15.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, he's the smartest man that ever lived, in my opinion, or at least the most influential man that ever
Well,
lived.
you mentioned like they're obsessed with like living forever and like
Yeah,
kind of hiding puzzles within your
yeah,
works. And
yeah,
man, that's kind of a way of, I mean, people, still debating it today. And man,
yeah.
it's so crazy how much is there to it. And it's all super fascinating. I've heard you mention before that he is possibly the son of Queen Elizabeth.
100%. I have absolutely no doubt about that. The circumstantial evidence is just overwhelming. Um, Elizabeth was thrown in the tower by Bloody Mary. Everybody's heard of Bloody Mary. Maybe you had one this morning. She was the Catholic queen. So England was Protestant because of Henry VIII. Skip past a couple short-term kings and queens, and we get Bloody Mary, his daughter by his first marriage, Catherine of Aragon of Spain. She's Catholic. Suddenly, England is Catholic again. Suddenly, there's turmoil, terrible turmoil, strife, which is what made England so strong. It's like everyone's suspicious of everyone else. That's why they became such great spies. So
Mhm.
Bloody Mary throws Elizabeth in the Tower of London, where I just visited last summer. And
Oh,
she's thrown in the tower with Robert Dudley, soon to be the Earl of Leicester. And they knew each other as kids. And this is historical fact. This isn't conspiracy
hmm
theorizing. These two young people were thrown in the tower together and suggested that they had an affair, that the guards would look the other way, because, of course, some guards were still loyal to Elizabeth and the Protestants. You never knew who to trust at this time.
Yeah.
And Bloody Mary dies. She doesn't have a kid. She's desperate to have a kid. Doesn't happen. And she dies. It's really incredible. But Elizabeth the First becomes Queen of England. She's only 25 years old. She's the Queen of England. The very first thing she does is make Robert Dudley Master of the Horse. And horses were extremely important, and the master of the horse had to always make sure horses were ready for anything to do with the palace. And the master of the horse got an apartment right next door to the Queen's bedroom. And Robert Dudley started living next door to the Queen's bedroom. And by chance, his wife living in Ireland died. That's a whole story. She was pretty obviously murdered. Could have been an accident, but she died. And the king, the Queen, and Dudley just start carrying on
Hmm.
like they're having an affair because they are. And rumors are flying, but she's the Queen. Her father was Henry VIII. He did whatever he wanted. She's the Queen. She can do whatever she wants, even though she's quote unquote eventually going to be called the Virgin Queen because it fits in with, again with the Christ story and all kinds of reasons. She's famously known as the Virgin Queen, which is why Jamestown settled in Virginia. Virginia is called Virginia because it's named after the Virgin Queen Elizabeth. Fun fact I learned
Wow.
doing all
So,
this. Isn't that
so
crazy?
yeah, so her dad was a King Henry.
Henry the Eighth was her
Holy shit.
dad.
Because I watched a movie like yesterday on Netflix. I didn't even realize it was a Shakespeare play, but it was like called The King. It was about Henry the Fifth, I want to say. Timothy Chalamet plays the king, but
What?
yeah, it was made in like 2019, 2018,
He
something.
plays a king?
It's yeah, like a young King Henry, I think the fifth, I want to
No
say.
kidding.
Yeah,
I got to
it's
check that
honestly
out.
really good. I was pretty impressed,
It
but
was Shakespeare? Couldn't have been Shakespeare.
they said it was based off of a Shakespeare play,
Oh, based
which
on a Shakespeare play. I can't
yeah,
believe I haven't heard of this, man.
and man, like so there was like this whole political aspect of it, Henry, like King Henry decides to like invade France because of a political assassination attempt on his life that somebody inside of like his court or somebody that he trusted, said that, the King of France sent an assassin to kill him. So they go into France and try, to take over France, which they ultimately do. They kill their prince, they take over, and part of the agreement of kind of England taking that land over was Henry marrying the king's daughter. And so she tips him off. She said, like, why the hell did you do this? My father would never send an assassin to kill you. And it's pretty convincing and ultimately proves that like they didn't send the assassin to kill him. So there's like this
Uh-huh.
like secret like false flag event to invade
Oh
another
yeah.
country to take it over,
Oh
so
dude.
it's like, dude, America does
Dude.
that all the time, I was like,
Oh
that is
man.
kind of deep. And then
Absolutely.
yeah, I was like, dude, the whole Francis Bacon Shakespeare thing was like secret society. Yeah, it's like it kind
Completely
of,
relevant to today and
yeah.
today's politics. I didn't know he made that. I see it's got to be Henry, the Henry plays, Henry IV and Henry V,
Hmm.
which are famous plays. That's one of those is yeah, he goes to France to fight, and that's the famous, there's a very rousing speech where he rouses his men to victory over France the next day with the famous "We band of brothers." And that was the kind of power of language. I say that Bacon created the empire because he made people feel so patriotic because of Shakespeare. I mean, they already were patriotic.
Hmm.
People are naturally patriotic, I
Yeah.
think. And he used these speeches, these incredible speeches, poetic speeches in Shakespeare. And that's one that I wonder Timothy Chalamet might deliver it if he's Henry V, who's a ne'er-do-well drunkard who grows into a great king, and that's the story. It's probably that one. I'll have to
Hmm.
watch that.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, that's exactly it. I
Yeah,
mean, he
that's
plays it pretty well, man. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't expect much, but it was fantastic. And
wow. All right, check it out.
yeah.
Cool.
Um, so I know that they were kind of in the same scene, in the same area, but was Francis Bacon ever tied to John Dee in any way?
100%.
Really?
100%. So they lived at the same time. Their lives overlapped. Dee was 20 years older, I want to say, and died younger. But Bacon was the book guy,
Hmm.
rumored to have read every book in England by the time he was 18. And John Dee was the book guy who had the biggest library, they think, in Europe even. He had
Wow.
like 9,000 volumes. But there's only one record of Francis Bacon going to his library. But 100% he was getting books from Dee all the time. And here's a fun fact that, okay, so Robert Dudley, the Queen's boyfriend, to finish that story, rumors were the Queen was pregnant, and Francis Bacon was born right next door to the palace in a place called York House, literally next door to Whitehall Palace, both on the Thames. Bacon's father, father that raised him was Nicholas Bacon, who was like the third most powerful man in the kingdom. And his wife, Anne Bacon, a hugely educated woman, was the Queen's lady in waiting. So how hard would it have been to pass the baby to the lady in waiting, take it next door and raise it as your own? There's hundreds of other little clues
Yeah.
around that whole thing. And that's why I think Bacon was her son. And shoot, I wanted to finish that story. And what were we talking about? Um,
John Dee.
John Dee.
Hmm.
So, okay, Robert Dudley also gets gifts from the Queen, one of which is she raises him to the gentry, as they say in England, and gives him a gentry name, and he becomes known as the Earl of Leicester. It's really complicated how they get the
Hmm.
names and why Leicester. I don't know. But he also was given a mansion like right there. Like all these people had mansions right there by Whitehall Palace and also mansions in the country. It was still really medieval. Like they clustered around the palace and they had their mansions in the countryside where, they made so much money with their farms and stuff. So the Earl of Leicester lived right next door to Francis Bacon and the king later, like when he they moved on from this. He wanted to get married to the queen, and she refused to marry him
Hmm.
because she knew she would lose all her power because women had no power. It was a miracle that she became queen because women had almost no power at all in England at that time period.
Yeah.
And she was brilliant, and she watched her father cut off her mother's head, although she was too young, but her father chopped off the head of two of his wives, had six wives, was crazy, and she knew she didn't dare get married
Yeah.
and manipulated men by pretending that she would marry them. And it was a diplomatic ploy. So anyway, Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, employed John Dee as a tutor. So John Dee was working right next door to Francis Bacon while Bacon was growing up. And John Dee was heavily involved with the Rosicrucians, and so was Bacon. And a lot of Bacon's occult knowledge must have come from John Dee, but it was in the area at the time in a huge way that it was the Europe and England were just steeped in the occult from Hermeticism, Kabbalah, and alchemy, which were all really big in Rosicrucianism, which was a giant hoax which preceded Freemasonry. And all of this stuff was happening exactly at the time Bacon was alive. And there's a and they I could see that Bacon, like I said, he was a prophet. He prophesied, he prophesied the coming of modern science.
Mhm.
He could see, he knew us so well as groups and as individuals. And it was obvious that this focus on the occult had to come to an end when Elizabeth died. And that's what happened, that King James was was anti-occult, even though he was there at the beginning of Freemasonry, which is what I'm saying. Freemasonry's not, they don't really do magic as such. They do these elaborate initiations and they're based on, the sun and the moon and all kinds of symbolism and math. They're really into math and geometry. But this idea of communicating with spirits, which is what John Dee was all about, that was on the way out. And Bacon didn't associate with that. And I think he very clearly separated the two and didn't associate himself with divination or scrying, which is what John Dee did, and communicating with angels. On the other hand, Dee's influence on the Rosicrucians was immense. And this was Bacon's great genius, is to pretty much absorb everything, which is kind of what Gnosticism does too, and then make something new out of it. And so he took all this stuff from Dee and other great thinkers at the time and great social movements at the time and put them into Shakespeare and Freemasonry and science. And those are the three main things that propelled the empire, of course, from the realm of espionage, which is what he was, this ability of the English to do spying, to do espionage is legendary. They're the world's greatest spies and the world's greatest actors. And I've said this a few times, and the best spies are the best actors because they're on stage 24/7.
Hmm.
You can't mess up. You lose your life. And that's why they became so powerful as an empire. They just became expert at delivering messages in a certain way, theatrically, presenting themselves and able to reach certain goals through this knowledge that came via Bacon. But John Dee was involved in the theater too. John Dee was a spy. John Dee was a mathematician and a scientist. So it huge, huge influence on Bacon. Another guy, Giordano Bruno, um, and these uh, art of memory, these memory exercises. And what Bacon had was the poetry. Like poetry is really powerful, and Bacon knew that. And the Bible also is one reason it's really powerful is he put that, poetic language in there.
Hmm.
But that's his great genius is to synthesize all this information and then put it back out. Yeah, totally associated with John Dee. But you won't find much record of that in the history books. But they knew all the same people. They lived and worked very close together. Dee, of course, was further out, his actual house. But they were courtiers. And when you're a courtier, it means you hang around the court being associated with the queen. And when you're a courtier, you're expected to be at court. And one reason these palaces are so big is that you stayed at court. You had a room. So they
Hmm.
100% knew each other, but I'm convinced that they knew not to let that association be very public. And of course that wouldn't be hard because first of all, it's dark in England, as I found out. Like it gets dark at 4 p.m. in the winter, and
Oh
these
wow.
guys have mansions, and all they have to do is get on their horse and go to somebody's mansion, and it's
Yeah.
easier to keep secrets in those days. Maybe not from each other.
You
I'm
don't
sure
have
everybody.
TMZ outside of the house waiting for you to get on the horse. You know,
Exactly.
they would be probably waiting for people like those too,
Exactly.
if it existed if TMZ existed back then. But yeah, that's super fascinating. You said like when Queen Elizabeth died, that kind of sparked like this whole move from alchemy to like science, like like a transition to modern science?
Not quite yet. It transitioned away from the occult.
Okay, yeah, yeah, sorry. I mixed that up.
No, no, it's a good point. Science was still waiting. So he wrote a book in 1605, The Advancement of Learning, because he saw, I have a great book here called The Jewel House about London at that time period and how, feverish it was with activity and people inventing new ways of doing things, which Bacon saw. He saw that with the right mental attitude, you could make progress. And that hadn't been a thing in Europe. Nobody thought about progress. They thought about saving their souls and not committing sin and stability in the kingdom. And Bacon was really the one that saw that with certain type of thinking, you could make progress. Now, they didn't use the word technology, but it was he meant that like
Hmm.
better ways of doing things. If you thought about it in a certain way, which is where how he invented modern science, because he said you can't think deductively, you have to think inductively. And the Greeks thought deductively, which when you think deductively, you prove something. You use logic and you say something like, well, all men are born of women. Okay, that's true. Socrates is a man. That's true. Therefore, Socrates was born of a woman. They're kind of a simple example, but
Hmm.
to truism, that's a syllogism, leads to something that's true, that's a fact. With inductive reasoning, you say it's more about the future. Well, the sun rose every day and the sun's going to rise tomorrow, and that's a fact, even though you can't prove it because it's about the future. It's a slightly different way of thinking. But what he also did was get people to stop doing things in secret and share their data, and that we
Gotcha.
can make things better for humanity, which is why he said he was doing this thing called science. And it really did kickstart people to start thinking in a different way and start thinking about making inventions that weren't for magic. It wasn't for them to talk to angels or to make gold. It was to, wow, what is this fire? Or what is a gas? What is the wind? How can we make a better ship? And sure enough, the he kicked it off, and the first body of scientific body was formed in London called the Royal Society for Improving Natural Knowledge. They straight up say Francis Bacon was our inspiration. He was our Moses. And the Industrial Revolution began in England 100 years later because of all
Hmm.
these inventions these guys came up with. Like I'm saying, these brilliant guys. And that was really part of the reason their empire was so powerful is they had better guns and better ships and better ways to get coal out of the ground and better ways to burn coal so they had more energy. And that all came straight out of Francis Bacon's urging. And he also saw that Scotland and England together would one day make a mighty empire. He predicted that. I mean, the guy was straight up was a prophet. And he helped engineer that whole thing.
Wow.
And even though I think he wanted to be king as son of the queen, she was too smart for him, and she never gave him any power. He was the smartest guy in the kingdom, but he had no job. Of course, he was doing Shakespeare at the time, which she fully well knew about. So he couldn't have a job, but she also didn't want him to have a job in government because he could be probably too persuasive.
Yeah.
And he didn't do anything. Nobody knows what he did officially until she died and King James knighted him. He was just a nobody. He didn't even have a knight. He wasn't even Sir Francis Bacon until his
Hmm.
mother died. and King James made him a knight. And suddenly, in a few years, he's Attorney General. Then he's Lord Chancellor, which is like the number two man in the kingdom. Actually served as king briefly. And it seems like, based on circumstantial evidence and stuff he teased out of his writing, that he really would have liked to have been king, but it wasn't going to happen. It would have been ridiculous because she
Yeah.
was the Virgin Queen. Of course, she didn't have any kids, and how could they spring that on the people? And he wasn't very popular. And then there's all this other drama around. Baconians also think the Earl of Essex was his brother, that Robert Dudley and Elizabeth had another son named Robert Devereux, who became the Earl of Essex. And it gets kind of disgusting because it appears that Elizabeth and the Earl of Essex had a big affair.
Oh wow. Damn. Yeah,
So could have
that's an
been,
issue.
like the ancient Egyptians, they practiced incest. The royal family in ancient Egypt did that, and I wouldn't put it past them to do that. It could, I don't really go there because
Yeah.
it could be that Essex was also her son. Most Baconians believe that. There is quite a bit of circumstantial evidence, not as much for Francis Bacon as being her son.
Hmm.
It could have been they didn't actually have an affair. It just seemed like they were having an affair. They spent all their time together for a couple years.
Yeah.
He
Well,
wound up getting
well,
his
I
head
could, I
chopped
could kind of
off.
see it like you know how like moms are really close to their sons,
Yeah,
and if they don't know that it's her son, maybe they just think that they were really, they're close like that.
that
Maybe I
could
don't know.
be.
Yeah, I'm
That
just trying
could
to like
be.
think about it from like a somebody that like has no idea, like kind of like staring at the situation. But
It's all different takes on it, but it's
yeah.
it's considered one of the great romances in history.
Oh.
And it ended up with Essex drawing a sword on her, Essex doing the Essex Rebellion. Looks like he wanted to take over and become king himself. It's a very, very famous episode in English history called the Essex Rebellion.
Cool.
And it got put down, and the Earl of Essex got his head chopped off. And whether the Earl of Essex and Bacon were brothers, they were best friends and worked for each other. And the Earl of Essex was part of the original British intelligence too. That's a whole other huge side story, books about it, and a movie about it called it's not called Earl Elizabeth and the Earl, it's something. It's a very famous movie with um what's his name? Errol Flynn and the babe of the decade. I haven't even seen it, if you can believe that. But it was a huge, huge story everyone knew about 40 or 50 years ago, and
Hmm.
and the Earl of Essex eventually losing his head, which shows you that these elites fight with each other. It's not this monolith where they're like always agreeing on, how to screw over everyone.
Yeah.
They have their inner battles, and that's one of them.
So,
So yeah, it's always, and that's the other amazing thing about this is this era. It's called early modern London and the Tudor era. So King Henry VIII was Henry Tudor. Henry VII was Henry Tudor. That started the Tudor line, the very famous Tudor line, the Tudor Rose, and it ended with Elizabeth when she died because she didn't have any kids. She was the Virgin Queen, and that fascinating era. And there's just
mhm.
movies and blogs and books and like Comic Cons, but Tudor cons, and people dress up like Tudors, and they tell stories about Queen Elizabeth, and everyone's heard of Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
It was just an incredible era, and that's when the empire really began. That's when America got settled, the beginning of the settling of America, and beginning of the empire. And it was, yeah, Elizabeth had a lot to do with it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
Um,
endlessly fascinating, as you say.
yeah, there's just like so many different like rabbit holes you can kind
Oh
of
man,
go down with that. It's
it's tough to pull it all together in a coherent fashion,
yeah.
and everything gets so long. long. Like I try to write a quick article like, why is the Shakespeare hoax so important? Am I going to make it punchy and just convince people this is why? And by the
Yeah.
time I'm done, it's like 6,000 words long because you can't just say something. You have to explain it,
Hmm.
which is fine. It's just not, it's not a 2-minute read.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Most,
so many parts about it, you know.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm sure like down those little hidden aspects, you find even more hidden aspects. Like, I mean,
100%, my friend,
like
100%.
Shakespeare wrote the Bible, but Shakespeare's
Yeah,
bacon. So it's like three, it's like it's
yeah,
crazy, man.
it is.
But so you say he had like that huge part in modern day science and kind of making it more practical in a way.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
bacon.
so
Go ahead.
yeah, no, I was like thinking like if he had anything to do with the Bible, like Jesus is performing all these miracles, but everybody
Yes.
like, if you're like Christians, like either don't believe it or they don't look at it as magic or anything like that. It's like all of that was kind of, it seemed like it was taken out of the Bible and early depictions of it. Like people were like painting Jesus with a wand and stuff, like performing his miracles. Some of those pictures were some of the earliest ones depicting him performing the miracles. So I was wondering if there could be any tie to like him, creating science in that more practical way, and then also like through religion, kind of taking that power out in the Bible.
Interesting. Well, the Old Testament is very explicitly bans all magic. 100%. You're
Hmm.
not to talk to demons. You're not to do divination. You're not to drink blood.
Except for except for like when it's Jesus's and it's the fake stuff at church.
So the Jesus stuff as magic, this is what I decided that
Mm-hmm.
magic is praying to spirits and Christianity and Judaism is you just go right to God. You don't mess around with spirits. Don't try to talk to spirits. You don't pray to anyone but God. And then, of course, Jesus is God, so you can pray to Jesus. And no, the priest isn't doing magic, but of course he is. I mean, the Catholic ceremony, he's turning water into wine. But I'm sure Catholic theology says it's because Jesus did it. And if Jesus did it, it's not magic, it's God. So it all gets really complicated. But what's
Hmm.
interesting is they totally let the magic back in for about 100 years, somewhere around 1400 to 1600. So Elizabeth dies around 1600.
Hmm.
Somewhere around 1400, the Kabbalah comes in around 1492. The Hermetic literature comes out of Egypt because Constantinople falls. Um, Pico della Mirandola and the Italian Renaissance. Like they start playing around with magic. And this guy, Cornelius Agrippa, actually publishes a book, 3 books of occult philosophy, that's just all about magic. And of course, people were always doing magic anyway. Like you sort of can't help it. Like you got your lucky charm, you got your thing you say. It's not quite prayer, but it's not really the occult either. You're not like, you know, trying to raise the dead or anything. It's just this big gray area. So that's what
Hmm.
I thought. Like dark magic is working with spirits and trying to gain personal power, but the magic of Christianity and Judaism is you go straight to God. But what's really interesting in all this is that the Kabbalah straight up is magic.
Hmm.
And it's really Gnosticism. All this magic is Gnosticism. And then to tie it with science, what's that famous quote? Like any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So there's a tie-in to science and magic. And my personal belief is that in a way everything is magic. like our bodies are magic. Like they're just working.
Hmm.
You got 2 trillion cells in your body. Science doesn't even know. Hello, there's too many to count. And they're all in communication with each other. You can feel your toe. If you hear a scary noise, a hormone is released in your hypothalamus. It triggers the
Yeah.
pituitary to pop down to your adrenals, and suddenly you've got cortisone in your system, and in like one split second, your heart's racing. Like you're all communicating, and we don't know. We know there's a hormone that goes from your hypothalamus to your pituitary to your adrenal, but how does it know where to go? How does it get there? How does it? Nobody knows. It's magic. I'm sorry. Like it's all just
Yeah.
magic. So
Yeah, there's
what's
so
the
so much to it, you know?
Oh God, it's just endless and it's really fun. I really enjoy. I despair sometimes of um getting through this pile of books, but I'm just gonna limit how much I can try to say and take it, you know. Oh, I just realized I'm an alcoholic. I'll take it page by page instead of day by day.
Page by page, like that.
And make these podcasts and try to make it fun, try to make it interesting.
Yeah.
Um, Encourage people to go to the Patreon and check out these podcasts. If you're all interested in the
Hmm.
plays, Macbeth is really fascinating because I think I'm original on this. I hate to say this because it's like saying like I'm in the NBA. Like for me to extend Shakespeare scholarship, this nobody.
Well, I think it might take like a more open mind outside of
That's what it is.
academia to be able to look at it like from like a lens that isn't being told like how to look at it, you know?
Oh, you're 100%, Alex. So there's
Which
a
I
great,
respect, man. I really respect what you
oh,
do
thanks, bro.
and
Thanks. Well, what's his name? Roman Polanski made a Macbeth movie, a movie of the Shakespeare play Macbeth in like 1977, 78. Everybody looks like a rock star. It's a time period, so it's set in like 12th century Scotland, and it's pretty great. He leaves out one chunk of the play, but Macbeth is the story of, it's supposed to be, oh, too much ambition. The man and his wife with too much ambition, and it's the punishment of too much ambition. But it's actually Macbeth gets mind controlled. Macbeth gets turned into a mind controlled assassin by the three witches that start the play. The play starts with them saying, "Fair is foul and foul is fair," which is an inversion,
yeah.
which is a Gnostic
Yeah.
inversion, which is God isn't love, God is evil. And they suddenly and Macbeth is described as like just a hero. He wants to defend the kingdom. He's a great fighter. He's humble. He's just this amazing guy who suddenly gets his brain scrambled by the witches, who, due to certain clues in the text, are intelligencers, and intelligencer was the word for spy. And suddenly he's got this idea that he's great and can be king someday. I'm skipping some stuff, but especially
Mhm.
his wife, Lady Macbeth, because Shakespeare really hates women. Women are almost always like messed with in horrible ways in these plays. Uh, you know, I'm not going to
Yeah.
spoil anything to
And
tell you that
people
they kill
thought
the
that he gave
king.
women a voice, right?
Right.
Like kind
And
of in a
that's what
way.
feminists say. Oh, Shakespeare gave women
Yeah.
a voice. Yeah, and then he like shits on them and
It kind of
tortures them and
kind of
smacks them
crude, yeah,
around.
crude
It's
in a way.
awful.
Yeah.
Like in Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, she's the bad one. She's the one that convinces her husband to kill the king. So I'm not going to spoil anything, but tell you like he kills the king.
Hmm.
I won't say what happens next, but I recommend the Polanski version because it really holds up for a modern audience. It looks like a modern film. The graphics are amazing. The graphics, the The shooting is great. The
Hmm.
photography is great. And it's really about a mind-controlled assassin who murders a king and creates chaos such that the English army has to save the day. And that's just
Whoa.
what happens. Yeah, that's just
Yeah, you
what's
see
there.
that actually happen, like,
But
in
nobody ever says
government.
that.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just a guy got too ambitious. He got in over his head. He got full of himself. No. And it's not about good and evil because they never confront the evil. Nobody even knows the witches existed because
Hmm.
anybody that did is dead. It's great. I would check it out and then listen to episode 4 and episode 5, where you'll learn a lot about Gnosticism. You'll learn a lot about Macbeth, and you'll get your feet wet with Shakespeare. And there's three really famous Shakespeare plays: Macbeth, Hamlet, and Romeo and Juliet.
Hmm.
And Romeo and Juliet is actually a horror story, and everyone thinks it's about romance. Oh, doomed love, doomed romance. It's almost no love or romance. There's a lot of lust. There's a lot of really crude sexuality. There's a lot of violence. And if you go to Substack or Patreon, it would be Shakespeare and the Occult, the hidden horror story in Romeo and Juliet. I wrote a short article. I managed to keep that one short because the podcast is 3 hours long. But if you're at all into Romeo and Juliet, probably the most popular play of all time. It's completely messing with our heads because there's a whole hidden horror story in there that he's like mocking us. Bacon was so smart. He was having a good time mocking us. And that phrase hiding in plain sight,
Yeah.
he was the master of that. Like there's a horror story staring you in the face, which again, you're 100% right. Like because I went into it suspicious and because I had this graphic I saw someone wrote on a chalkboard outside a coffee shop. I saw the picture of it. It said, Romeo and Juliet is not a love story. There's 6 deaths in 3 days, and both of them die at the end, or something like that. Much better said. And it's like, it's not a love story. It's a horror story.
Yeah, that's a
So
lot.
if
A
you
lot.
want to see like how crazy he could hide stuff, that's a good example. Somebody just wrote a book about Julius Caesar. This is another really famous Shakespeare play. It's called The Tragedy of Julius Caesar. It's probably the best one because it's the one that's most based on history.
Okay.
And it got me to learn about ancient Rome and and the murder of Caesar. Probably one of the most famous events in world history was Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March, which is coming up. Beware the Ides of March. That's all in there.
Hmm.
And some guy just wrote a book. He actually was an executive at a TV company, I think NBC, top executive. And he went off to London to get a PhD in Shakespeare studies. That's what I mean. PhD in Shakespeare studies. There's libraries full of nothing but books about Shakespeare. And he put out a book a few years ago that has a completely new take on Julius Caesar that nobody ever saw before. Two takes. And one of them is that he's subtly calling Julius Caesar Jesus Christ, JC and
Whoa.
JC. And it's so buried in the text, but this guy is so brilliant. His name is Steve Somer. It's called Shakespeare's History Play. I can't even begin to explain it because this is really subtle. This I never would have been able to see, but it's just another way. And Bacon loved Julius Caesar. He thinks he's the greatest human, natural born human that ever lived.
Really?
Yeah, so that ties in. It always ties in. And the other one is The Tempest. Okay, that's the fifth most famous Shakespeare play.
Yeah.
And this one I didn't come up with either. This really kind of got me going though, is that The Tempest is an allegory of an occult initiation ceremony. of a secret society like the Eleusinian Mysteries in ancient Greece. This book came out in 1923. So that's 300 years later. People are just figuring out what's in these plays. Hamlet, woman wrote a book, Eleanor Presser wrote a book in the 70s, 1970s. So 350 years after the plays were written, she says, "What's up with the ghost? Was that a ghost? What's this about revenge?" She writes this brilliant book, and she determines, based on the text of the play, that it's not a ghost, it's a demon, which is in the play. Hamlet's like, is that really my father, or is that a demon? He decides it's his father, and why would his father be telling him to kill someone if his father's spirit's in purgatory being cleansed? His father would come back and say, I forgive that guy for my murder. It would be the Christian thing to do.
Yeah.
Instead, this father ghost is telling him to kill Claudius, which he eventually tries to do. And the whole play's about why didn't he kill him sooner? Well, whatever. It's too complicated to go into Hamlet,
Yeah.
but this woman, Eleanor Presser, writes a book basically showing that, and Shakespeare knew this, of course, that that's a demon was controlling Hamlet, and that Hamlet goes from a sensitive, overeducated prince to a demon-possessed homosexual serial killer. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It took hundreds of years for that to come out, but look at the play. Hamlet kills like four people in the play. Two of them are his best friends. And he's sort of like thought of as, oh, sweet prince, because the last scene in the play, Horatio says, um, good night, sweet prince. May flocks of angels sing thee to thy rest. Even though he didn't do one sweet thing the entire play. He practically tortures Ophelia to death. Ophelia commits suicide. His mother, Gertrude, thinks he's going to kill her. He uh, he kills Polonius by accident, but there's like three cold-blooded murders on Hamlet's hand, but somehow he's still thought of as the sweet prince
Yeah.
that we're supposed to feel sorry for. And that's how Bacon could mess with our heads, man. It's just wild.
It really is. I mean, like just how intertwined it all becomes, even in modern
Absolutely.
society. I mean,
Absolutely.
holy cow. Like you can take college courses on Shakespeare, imagine like finding out about Francis Bacon
Yeah.
after taking the college course. I'd be like, what the hell? But yeah, I'm sure like even that, like they're likely just telling you how to think about the writing or the play, you
Yeah.
know?
It's very confusing, the place, and they'll tell you what it really means.
Yeah.
When, of course, and most people encounter Shakespeare when they're still too young. I was older, and and I kind of had a sense of what makes up a story, what makes up a novel, what makes up a film, and I can critique it. And I think that's why, it's like you mentioned it before, I didn't have this, I hadn't been bred in me that Shakespeare's some great genius that you have to worship. Plus, I'm down on the British Empire, and he's 100% associated with the British Empire. You kind of can't think of England for more than 5 minutes without Shakespeare coming up. It's like,
Yeah.
huh. And that's what I think Bacon intentionally did. This is how brilliant he is. This is my last essay called The Shakespeare Hoax, um, the Theater of Religion and Espionage. Something like that. I keep changing the title to try to make it catchier. Foul
Mhm.
deeds will rise, which is a line from Hamlet. That he purposely created Shakespeare to make him an object of worship because he made it seem like he was a nobody from a small town who had, by
Yeah.
some mysterious way, become the greatest writer in the whole world for all time. Like, why wouldn't you worship that? And it made England feel special. It made England feel exceptional. and worthy of creating an empire. That's my theory. And again, I'm not alone on that. Like,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a lot
yeah, a lot of
so do you
other people
think
think something similar.
yeah, so do you think Shakespeare like actually existed, or do you think he was kind
He
of
did.
fabricated? Okay.
No, 100%. He was a real person. His name was William Shakespeare.
Mm,
Um, and he was involved in the theater. He was a part-time actor. He owned part of the Globe Theater and another theater. He was on the scene and he was paid to be a front man. And the reason they got away with it is because nobody cared who wrote the plays. I've done this many times. People that like TV and they know The Sopranos and what's it called? Game of Thrones and go through 10 TV shows. I go, who wrote them?
hmm
You love Game of Thrones. Who's the writer? Oh, I don't know. But they know every actor. They'll know all five leading actors,
Yeah,
right? And who they're
yeah.
dating and they don't know who wrote it. Nobody knows who writes these TV shows. Some people know about film. Famous directors sometimes write their films and they get known as writers, but these were the TV shows of the day and nobody cared who wrote them, except for some of the actors, other writers, and you know, the the censor board, the board that approved everything had to be approved by the government. It was a police state.
hmm
But the common people and almost nobody really cared who wrote it. So nobody cared. Nobody inquired. And if they did, they already knew about it. Anybody that needed to know about it knew to keep their mouth shut and that just don't talk about it. And most people couldn't read or write, so nobody would write it down, but they knew to keep their mouth shut. And a lot of people knew about this. A lot of people helped on it. And they were kind of in on this really cool secret. So why would they expose it? What would they get for exposing it? Who would believe them anyway? And then,
Yeah.
there were hundreds of plays all the time. So Shakespeare just sort of got forgotten about. Except they made this book, the famous book, the First Folio, with all 36 plays. And right after Bacon died, 1640, England goes into a civil war. There were no theaters at all. And the Puritans that we mentioned before who settled in Cape Cod, Boston area are more famous than the Jamestown Rosicrucians,
Mhm.
shut the theaters down. And everybody thinks, oh, they shut the theaters down, the Puritans, because they're killjoys, they're Christian, no fun Christians. Turns out they shut the theaters down because there was rampant pedophilia in them. You
Yeah.
know, that reminds you of anything
Kind of
modern.
recent, yeah, like
Anything recent
Hollywood.
pop into mind there?
Yeah, it's exactly Hollywood. It's just
Exactly
insane.
Hollywood,
Yeah,
except they had kids, they had boys playing the women's roles, which was
crazy.
peculiarly English.
hmm
Italy had a theater scene. They didn't have women played by boys. Spain had a big theater thing. They didn't have boys playing women. But these boys are playing these women's roles that are quite sexually suggestive. And recent scholarship has come out that they were kidnapped, they were forced to perform, and there
Damn.
was rampant pedophilia, and that's why the Puritans shut the theater down. So it wasn't for like another 100 years, like until around 1700, that people even started thinking like, who is this Shakespeare guy?
Yeah.
And then later, it was the Freemasons that made him a star. And here I get original.
Ah.
There's so much Freemasonry in the plays. It's the first um, sustained Freemasonic symbolism everywhere. It's like saturated in many of the plays, especially Macbeth. And that Freemasons see that. They can read the symbolism. They're like,
hmm
dang, that's Masonic ritual. That's Masonic symbolism. That's Masonic symbolism. This is Freemasonic. And that's a lodge brother And they took a blood oath to help Lodge Brothers. So they'll just know that that's important for me to promote that play. And that's my theory on how Shakespeare really got to be so popular. He was relentlessly pushed. Again, just like our modern world, they can kind of make a
Hmm.
star out of anyone. You know, you play a
Yeah.
song 100 times on the radio, it's going to stick in people's ear and they're going to think it's a great song.
Yeah.
Not that there isn't real talent out there and real brilliant stuff, but they can also create what they want to create to be popular. And why wouldn't they? Because there's so much cash involved. There's so much
Yeah.
power and cash. And they control the stars. You know, you got to wonder about this Timothy Chalamet. Did he speak out against the uh the COVID medication we were all told to
Oh
imbibe?
yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think
Yeah,
hardly any
exactly.
actors did. Isn't that weird? Not.
Yeah. Yeah, and if it was somebody, that famous that did speak out on like you know, an injury that they might have gotten from a certain medical thing, whatever. I don't want to say it, get flagged, but
Right. Yeah, no, we'll dance
but
around it.
they're absolutely destroyed. Eric
Yeah.
Clapton was a huge
Yeah.
one. Like how
Yeah.
he got like destroyed by the Rolling Stone like for like them just calling his story bullshit. Like he was almost paralyzed and it never at one point during the couple weeks that he really couldn't move a whole lot, he thought he'd never play again,
Isn't that
so
incredible?
and it's totally discredited by the Rolling Stone just saying, F you, like you're
They're the
lying.
worst.
It's yeah,
His own kids were, Dad, you're embarrassing us.
yeah.
The greatest guitar player, one of the best ever. His own kids are like, Dad, please don't talk about it. He said my phone stopped ringing. My friends wouldn't call me. His
Really?
hands were paralyzed.
Yeah.
How could he not say something? And Van Morrison spoke up.
Oh yeah, I think I
Van
remember
Morrison was
that.
just like, I got to get back to work. Like, screw this. This is dumb. How can we not be
Well, yeah, as
performing?
a as a like smaller local musician myself, like even hearing like the bigger ones push that crap and then like push the shut down everything, the whole
Yeah,
let's shut everything down and hope that works, man. It's like,
yeah.
yeah, that might work for you because you're like on tour like in arenas, but when you shut down where you go make money, it makes things
Ah,
impossible for some people, but
it's
um,
such a nightmare.
yeah. Super crazy how it like again, like all kind of intertwined through Francis Bacon and these like
Hmm.
secret societies
Hmm.
being tied to elites and
Hmm.
them controlling ultimately or dictating like what happens like
Yeah,
absolutely insane and fascinating to look into, man. Like you kind of like
completely.
open this huge world into that
I
with
think so.
Bacon.
I think so. I'm trying to swim around in it.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Like, what are some of like your next kind of points of attack? Looking into all this, like, do you have any like?
Well, I did Midsummer Night's Dream, episode 18. So that's turns out another very popular play. I still think Romeo and Juliet's the most popular, but with
Mhm.
highbrow intellectuals, it's Hamlet because they can endlessly analyze it. Then there's Macbeth because it's so dark and violent and scary. Julius Caesar, that they give kids to read in high school, which, by the way, they make every kid read Shakespeare for some reason. Somehow I
Yeah,
escaped it. I don't know why they didn't give it to me in high school. It was
really.
a blessing. Yeah.
I was just
'Cause-
not interested in it in high school.
Oh, it's
I couldn't
bad.
get
It's not
into it.
good. It's so
Yeah,
stupid to give it to kids. There's so many
yeah,
better plays. Give them Our Town or,
yeah.
it's,
English and history were always my two favorite subjects, but I could never get into Shakespeare. I don't
I
know why,
know.
but I was
Like,
just like, man,
yeah, it's ridiculous.
maybe I should get. Yeah. So, are you going through each play right now?
I'm not
At
going to
that
be
point?
able to, but I got to do part two of Midsummer Night's Dream. So what I found with
Mhm.
Midsummer Night's Dream is this spirit King of the Fairies has a drug, a special herb that he controls other people's minds with. and I call
Gosh.
it instead of Midsummer Night's Dream, Midsummer Night's MK Ultra,
Yeah.
which I can hardly believe I'm seeing this stuff. And I try to read as much as I can of what other people have written about the play, and they just don't talk about it. I'm getting tired, so I won't even go into that. But listen to that episode 18, and I got to do part two because they really trash women in this play again. Like
Wow.
uh, Oberon has his wife have sex with a donkey because she won't give
Yeah.
him up a little boy. He wants the
Yeah.
boy. It's so weird. Why do you want a boy, Oberon? I just want the boy. Give me the boy. She won't give him the boy. So his henchman turns Bottom into a donkey, and that's the famous image, right? The donkey and the woman, which looks sweet because we all love animals, and yeah, you hug a donkey. They actually have sex in the play. He's not
Oh
quite a
yeah.
donkey, he's a donkey-headed man, but it's like bestiality. It's so gross, man. And this is one of the most popular Shakespeare plays that the Wedding March comes from. The Felix Mendelssohn dun 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 dun. He composed
Oh,
it for Midsummer Night's Dream. It's all just so crazy. So I'm gonna finish Midsummer Night's Dream. I have to finish um, explaining how the Knights Templar became the Freemasons because the Knights Templar are a big part of this story. And I have to just detail how Francis Bacon, all the evidence that Francis Bacon started Freemasonry. There's an essay, how Freemasonry came out of Scotland on Substack. Substack is a little easier to find things. Like
hmm.
if any of your listeners are readers, go to Substack.
I actually need to
There's
check that out. I'm more of a reader, and I need to.
yeah,
I
go
honestly, I've never checked out Substack, so.
yeah, go to Substack. It's cool. It's easier to find stuff. It's laid out a little better. If you go to Patreon on your phone, it's kind of easy to find stuff. But there's an essay called "Birth of a Religion," how Freemasonry originated in Scotland, and that shows how Scotland really plays a big role along with England, and that's why it's called Great Britain. Scotland
Mhm.
played a really big role in all of this. A lot of the great scientists came out of Scotland, the great mathematicians. And so I got to do that. I got to do the Freemasonry, those Knights Templar, and uh, Midsummer Night's Dream Part Two. And it's 100% working on the book. And I think I'll switch to interviewing people. I'll interview other people because to do
Cool.
these podcasts, I spend weeks writing them because I don't do so good just blabbing. I like to write it out
Yeah.
and rewrite it and then try to work in music cues and hopefully some humor and make them really kind of mini, I don't know what you call it even, podcast, but it's not your typical
Kind of like
interview
yeah,
podcast.
like a little mini like documentary or.
Yeah, I guess they're like little mini documentaries. Check out episode one.
Mm-hmm.
People tend to like it. There's some humor in it. I start each episode with a piece of a Shakespeare play, and there's one Shakespeare play. In fact, it's Henry IV, Part Two, where Francis Bacon's actually in the play. He plays a tapster at the Boar's Head Tavern, and then so episode one, you'll actually hear what all us Baconians realize is that Francis Bacon put himself in the play, and that's the other thing I realized. Like he's in every single play. Like he's the witches in Macbeth. He's Prospero in The Tempest. He's Mark Antony and
Damn.
Julius Caesar. He's always in the play as a major character because he could write on 4 or 5 levels at once. He could pretty much do whatever he wanted with language. He was a freak. He was a freak. He was a
Wow.
Mozart of words, and like Mozart was writing symphonies at age 5 or something.
Mm-hmm.
So Bacon was like that.
Well, I mean, language altogether, like if he was close to John Dee, who
Yeah,
wrote down the Enochian language,
yeah.
or that's,
Invented a whole language.
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. These guys are brilliant, and there's other
imagine,
guys.
yeah, imagine we probably can't even comprehend the way if he, like, I mean, probably had that knowledge from John Dee, but the level of comprehension that we have over like what he understands as the language, like all intertwined with others, especially like possibly the Enochian was, man,
Absolutely.
what a
Absolutely.
wild thought.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Holy cow, man. Well, Robert Frederick, I appreciate your time. You want to tell everybody where to find you again?
Yeah, Patreon, The Hidden Life is Best. There's the website where there's tons of stuff,
Hmm.
thehiddenlifeisbest.com. And The Hidden Life is Best on Substack are the best places to find me. You can email me at robertfrederick at thehiddenlifeisbest.com. And it's been great talking to you.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I hope to have you on again coming
Oh,
up.
yeah, sure. Let's stay in touch.
Yes, sir. Well,
Take
thanks.
care. Have a
You
great
too.
day.
All right. Later.
Bye.
Listen close, it's the occult folk. It's the occult